This conference will now be recorded.
I am now calling the Monday, September 23, 2024 meeting of the Board of Finance to order. So, if is Kathleen there?
Yeah.
Would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, young lady?
Good. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the preceding meeting, which is the August 26, 24 meeting?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any changes? Not that I received.
All right. Anyone opposed?
Supposed to get them in advance. You can do them now, but I'm just wondering on page 4 at the bottom.
End of October?
Yeah, is that what you wanted there? I wasn't at the meeting, but at the blank of October, should it be end of October?
Yes. Okay. I see.
Modify my motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Okay. And I'm not sure we've gotten the second yet. Who would like to do the second?
Carl did.
All right. All in favor? Aye. Does anyone oppose? Does anyone abstain? All right. I believe this carries unanimously. Communications from the audience. Does anyone have any communications from the audience that wishes to speak with a 3-minute maximum?
Nope.
All right. Hearing none. We'll now go to communications from members. Going once. Going twice. I guess we have none. Finance Director's report and miscellaneous. Tom, do you want to start with the monthly financial report summary?
Yeah, thanks, Houston. So I'll take you through the August 2024 monthly financial report. As you'll recall, when we did the July report, we had a lower than typical property tax and assessments figure, primarily due to the fact that tax bills went out a month late for this particular fiscal year, giving taxpayers an additional month to pay without penalty. As anticipated, if you take a look at the August report, we've caught back up to our projected percentage range as of the end of August. So we had a good collection month in August for property tax and assessments. One highlight on intergovernmental grant revenue is the receipt of about $827,000 for motor vehicle tax reimbursement grant funds. And that is 100% of the amount that we budgeted for the fiscal year. It's pretty typical that early on in the fiscal year, you don't see a whole lot of intergovernmental grant revenue. So this is pretty typical. Charges for services are up a little bit relative to last year, primarily driven by timing of Board of Education receipts for pre-K tuition, as well as an increase in landfill permit collections. As referenced at our last meeting, other local revenues is showing a percentage received figure of much lower than what it was as of this point in time last fiscal year. And the primary reason for that is simply because there was an increase to the interest income budget line item for fiscal year 25. So it adjusts that percentage calculation accordingly. Shifting on down to expenditures, given that it's early in the fiscal year, there are a number of expenditures that are they're journaled early in the fiscal year, but they pertain to the entire year's worth of expenses. So that would include health insurance expenditures, as well as a number of purchase orders for service contracts that last throughout the course of the whole year. If you were to prorate those amounts, then our town operating expenditures would be at 20.06% as opposed to the 30.4% that is shown on the grid. And if you take a look at the graph on the second page of the report, you'll notice that that's pretty consistent with previous fiscal years. The other notable line items, or the other notable items in the expenditures to report on, would be health and social services, which are a little bit higher than you would anticipate in a typical year. That's being driven by the URAA obligations that the town is required to cover with respect to the Avon Place apartment fire, as well as the fact that the town's annual pension and OPEB contributions have been made. Other than that, for the most part, expenditure and revenue activity is generally in line with expectations. Any questions on the monthly report?
I don't have a question, but I do comment on it. So just to look at the other local revenue, that interest income.
Mhm.
So it is only 31% of what's budgeted for this year. And as you said, because we quadrupled the amount that we were budgeting for, that's why it's pretty close to what it was last year. It'll be 120%. But it's also 187% over budget. So we should be looking at 100,000 a month, right? It's 1.2 million divided by 12 is 100,000 a month, and we're at 3.74. So we're way over what we had expected. It's double almost what we're budgeted for.
Yeah, relative to the budget, the trending revenues are higher than budget.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Further questions?
And to add on to Kathleen's comments on that particular line, now that we know we've got a 50 basis point adjustment once, and we're expecting another possible 50 basis points, have we looked at what that might do to the revenue line?
Well, now, if you recall during the budget process, we referenced the fact that it is our practice to be conservative with these projections. And so Kathleen just noted the fact that so far we're trending pretty well relative to the overall budget. I would anticipate that based on the rate cut by the Fed and the anticipated rate cuts throughout the rest of the fiscal year, that we will see a drop off in interest income. However, given the fact that we've conservatively projected and budgeted the figure, I don't have any immediate cause for concern as to whether or not we're going to make that budget number.
On the receipt side for property and tax assessment, I might be reading this wrong, or there's a typo, where it says in section A that the current levy is at 51.72%, and prior year was 56.68. When I look in the chart, it says 51 and 53. Should those be the same number, or am I reading this wrong?
No, they're different. So the number in the chart, that is the overall percentage collected of every revenue line item that is incorporated under property tax and assessments. So that is not just, that's not just the current tax levy collections. That would be collections from prior tax levies, interest and penalty collections as well. So like if a taxpayer has an overdue bill and they have to pay interest and fees associated with that, that would be incorporated into the overall figure. The note that is included in Note A specifically references the current tax levy collection. So that's just granted this 2023 tax levy, the bills that went out in July of this year, what's the percentage collected as of August 31st.
Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, hearing no other questions, who's going to report on the Avon Place Apartments Uniform Relocation Assistance Act? Is that going to be you, Brandon, or Tom?
I think Tom's going to take that.
Yeah, I could speak to it, although I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add since the last time we talked about this. We continue to try to find an end date for people to move back into to the apartments at Avon Place. We're not quite there yet. We're getting closer. Costs that have been incurred to this point in time are up around $330,000 total, so we continue to monitor those costs. Those costs are spread across 2 fiscal years, so that would be the fiscal year that just ended as well as into fiscal year 25. Other than that, I don't really have anything additional to add unless, Brandon, I don't know if you have any.
I do have one question that I'd ask. When is the lien going to be put on? Once the number has been finalized, or do you have plans to put an interim lien on?
So I think we're close enough to the end now that we're going to wait until all the costs are in and then file the lien. So with any luck, knock on wood, I hope to have everybody relocated by November 1st or thereabouts. So shortly thereafter, we'll compile everything and then file.
Got it. Does the relocation lien prime their mortgage?
That I don't know, Houston. I'd have to ask about that.
Okay. That would obviously improve our chances of being paid.
Correct.
Any questions from anyone else? All right, discussion of year-end financials. I assume that's probably you, Tom?
Yeah, that's correct. So I'll just give another update on our year-end financial process. At our last meeting, I highlighted some of the year-end projections for fiscal year 23-24, and I had indicated that it was likely for us to be able to expect positive operating results in the amount of about $3 million. My anticipated time frame for being able to finalize these figures, at least in an unaudited format, would be towards the end of October, which would coincide with our scheduled annual audit fieldwork. So none of that has materially changed. So I don't really have any updates with respect to operating results or timelines, but I would like to remind you of some of the year-end transactions that I brought up last month. And I also wanted to bring another potential adjustment to your attention. So I'll start by going through and recapping some of those transactions that we spoke about previously. So last month, we went over some assignments and transfers that could be anticipated. One of them being $1.25 million of an assignment to help offset the use of unassigned fund balance, which relates to our use of unassigned fund balance as part of the fiscal year 2025 budget process. Another assignment that we discussed was $200,000 to offset future pension contributions, as well as $150,000 of an assignment to offset future OPEB contributions. Those are pretty standard assignments that you'll see anytime you take a look at some of our recent year-end transaction booklets. We also discussed an assignment to help offset our obligations under the URAA with respect to the Avon Place apartment fire. We ballparked that number to be about $200,000. Having said that, that's not a finalized number. We'll try to firm that number up as we get closer to the year-end transactions presentation.
Would that be closer to the 330 you had spoken about moments ago?
No, because remember, some of that is from the previous fiscal year. I think we're just looking forward at this point. So we'll get a better sense for what we might be able to anticipate for fiscal year 25, and we'll consider an assignment for that amount.
Thank you.
Yep. And then we also discussed an assignment for road improvements. Again, we don't have a firm figure on that. You'll recall that we did have an assignment last year of about $1.6 million, which was appropriated partially through a supplemental appropriation in the spring in the amount of $200,000. And then $1.4 million was appropriated through the fiscal year 2025 budget. And so that assignment that we utilized from the previous fiscal year made up the majority of our road improvement budget for fiscal year 2025. So look forward for something to be included in fiscal year 2024's year-end process for a similar purpose. Finally, the last item that we talked about was a transfer to our compensated absences fund. Again, I didn't have a firm number for that, but I anticipate about $100,000 be transferred to that fund at the end of the year. Again, similar to the pension and OPEB assignments, this is a pretty standard year-end transaction that you could see going back over the course of multiple fiscal years. So what I also wanted to do today, and this is not something we discussed last month, but I wanted to talk about a couple of transactions that you are likely to see, which would amount to some sizable transfers from the Capital Projects Fund and the Capital and Non-Recurring Expenditures Fund. These transfers will go back to the General Fund and the Sewer Fund. And so to explain some background for this, I just want to talk about how the capital project funding process works. Typically, every capital project that is approved through an appropriation most often times it would be through the annual budget process. So there's a dollar amount budgeted for each capital project. And then what happens is upon approval of the budget, a dollar amount in the amount of these appropriations is transferred to another fund. So we have these two funds that we consider capital projects funds that are used to track the activity associated with every capital project that we approve. So a transfer goes into one of these capital projects funds, and over the course of, oftentimes it's several years for a project to be completed, over the course of that time, expenditures are recorded against each of these appropriations. Another thing to consider is that during this time frame, there could be reimbursements received for some of these projects from state or federal government or some other funding source. So those reimbursements are oftentimes recorded in the Capital Projects Fund. Finally, when all is said and done and the capital project is completed, there's a pretty good chance in most cases that the expenditures did not come up to 100% of the dollar amount that was appropriated and transferred into the fund. And so you may have noticed over the past couple of years, if you've been through the year-end closing process, there have been a number of transfers for projects that are closed that will take the remaining balances for a number of projects and then transfer whatever's left over back to their originating fund. So for example, let's say in fiscal year 21, there was a project that was appropriated for $2 million and $2 million was transferred over to the Capital Projects Fund. Then in fiscal year 2023, that project is closed. However, the final cost was $1.9 million, leaving $100,000 left over. As part of the year-end transactions, I would request a transfer back to the general fund of that remaining $100,000. So in previous years, I have done this, but I've done it specifically with respect to the capital projects that have been completed in that year. As part of this year's closing process, I've gone back over the course of several years and reviewed the residual equity that is sitting in the fund balances of each of these capital projects funds. And I am anticipating that we'll be recommending that these residual equity balances be transferred back to their originating funds. So I've gone through a number of different projects that have been completed over the course of the last several years and identified balances that have been left over associated with those projects. Those balances have been sitting in the fund balances of these capital projects funds. So it's a different fund than the general fund, but it's still the same concept. It's still fund balance. As part of a housekeeping operation to take all of these funds and sweep them back to where they originated, I anticipate that we will request a transfer in between the amount of $1.4 and $1.9 million back to the general fund as part of the year-end closing process. So I wanted to kind of summarize that for you in advance, given the fact that we're 2 months away from when you'll be reviewing all of these year-end transactions. I just wanted to get this on your radar so that you had some time to think about it and ask questions if you have any.
So these were capital projects that you've transferred the money over for a capital project?
Yeah.
And now you want to put it back to the general fund, not the capital fund?
At the conclusion of the project. So for example, take the examples that I've given about the general fund. If the general fund budget includes a certain dollar amount to fund a specific capital project. Let's say it's $200,000. That money leaves the general fund and goes into the capital projects fund. But then 200,000 may not be used. So that dollar amount is just going to sit in the balance of the capital project fund unless it is brought back to its originating source and returned to the general fund, at which point it would be available for any purpose deemed necessary.
Okay.
Yeah, the important thing about this for you is that capital projects you can find them in Fund 2. So whenever you fund a capital project, basically there's an operating transfer out that goes from the general fund, it goes to Fund 2 for that specific capital project. The key is capital projects, they don't lapse. The appropriation doesn't lapse until there is an action. There's a recommendation from management, action by the council or the board of finance to formally close that project balance to fund balance or some other funding source or, special revenue fund, wherever it came from. So that's essentially what we're doing now. We have all of these old capital projects that have remaining equity. No capital project ever comes out to exactly, the cost of 100% of what was budgeted. So we've got all of these remainders that we're cleaning up as a matter of housekeeping. And I think once Tom and I have a chance to go through everything in its totality, the recommendation is going to be to take all of those residuals and just close them out to the general fund to clean it up.
How many projects are we talking about have a residual balance? And like, what's the time frame of how old those funds are and where have they been sitting and are they invested? Have they been invested all this time?
Yeah. So our cash is all pooled.
It's in a STIF fund.
So it's, most of it would be in STIF. So regardless of the fact that it might be housed in the fund, it's a capital fund, it's
It's just
still.
ledgers, right? And these are like ledgers that you're keeping for these funds?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
it's a
But
separate general, but like the general.
Money is in a STIF fund.
Right, that's
Yeah.
right. The cash is in one place, the accounting associated with the projects, it's in a different
And
fund
it's,
from a general ledger standpoint.
and it's sitting allocated to something that isn't going to spend it.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep,
Better to put it in the general fund so that it can be allocated as appropriate rather than just sit. Yeah, I get it.
yeah. And to answer your question about how many, I don't know if I have the exact number because in a lot of cases, like I went back and looked at a lot of detail and in a lot of cases, it's a couple $100 here, like $1,000 there. So there's a lot of really small ones.
There has to be to get up to $1.5 million.
Right, yeah, and it does go back a long way. Like a lot of it goes back to, some of it I trace back to like 2009. So that's where the accumulation comes from.
So when you make your recommendations, could you also give us like an inventory of what are the projects that are still allocated? And, how old are those projects and how close are they to becoming closed? Or how do we get a process in place
Yeah, that's
that
what I
when a
was thinking.
project is closed,
Yeah, so
we
like
close the project and take care of the funds?
So like I said, over the last couple of years, we have been, and I just did it this week. I work with the department heads to talk about any outstanding balances and come to a conclusion as to whether or not a project account can be closed. And then I would recommend, as part of the year-end closing process, that those funds be returned back to their originating source. We've done that over the course of the last couple of fiscal years. Up until now, we haven't gone all the way back and looked at some of the history, because it's kind of a tedious, lengthy process.
So the good process is in place now, but it didn't used to be cleaning up the past.
To a degree, there's nothing wrong with the fact that the
Right.
funds were in the capital project funds.
Sure.
From an accounting standpoint, that it's perfectly viable for those amounts to simply just be closed to the fund balance of Fund 2 or Fund 3.
Sure.
But it's really just a matter of kind of,
Cleaning up.
we like to,
Cleaning up,
refer to
yeah.
it as housekeeping, cleaning it up.
And I assume it is for most funds, not material. Otherwise, we would have gotten a mention in our audit letter.
Sorry, I didn't quite get,
It would have been in the audit findings. If it
right,
was
yeah, if
substantial.
the auditors had any concern with the way that these funds were being accounted for, they would have indicated such.
Right. So, well, it certainly is good to get it cleaned up, but it sounds like most of the time it's not a huge amount. All right. Any further questions?
Yes, I have a question, but it's not what's on this list. Thank you for sending the OPEB and the retirement paperwork that you sent us.
Oh, yeah.
With the amounts on them. So I guess I wasn't clear when I made my request at the last meeting. So you did send us for 2024, but I had asked about over time, are we catching up? And so having only 1 year doesn't let
Oh,
me
I see.
see what the
Catching up
gap
on
is.
the accrued
So if
liability.
you could also send me just this one sheet for 20 to 23, that will give the 5 years so that when we look at the budget, we'll know, are we heading in the right direction and what's going into that fund? Or what's going to be budgeted for it
Mhm.
for next fiscal year.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, I can provide you some historical data
Yeah,
and,
just this one page.
yeah.
This is fine.
Okay.
It shows the gap, because my concern is about the gap. Are we closing on the gap or not?
Yep, yeah, and yeah, I'll share that with you, and I can say that, in consultation with our actuaries, we follow their recommendations, to make, contributions at the level that they recommend. Ultimately, that is designed to close that gap over time, and we have been making progress in that regard.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So we're done with 6C. I don't believe we have any old business. So the next item is new business. The presentation of the proposed acquisition of 200 Fisher Drive.
It is not until now that I noticed there's a second screen there that I can see. I've been looking at it, but then I realized, wait, that didn't used to be there.
No.
I like it, thank you.
Houston, do you want us to just jump right in here?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's jump right in here.
Okay. So what I'd like to do tonight is just go through the slides that are in the background material. This is the same presentation that we gave to the council at the last meeting. However, I don't have the architect here, and Bridget had a pre-existing engagement tonight, so she couldn't be here either. So what you may want to do at some point is at least listen to the first 10 minutes or so of the presentation that was given to the council, because then you can hear the superintendent's remarks. And that presentation, I included the link in your background material, and you can also find it online. So I strongly encourage you to take a look at that, because I think her comments are really important. Having said that, Susan will take the first couple of slides here, and then I'll jump in to take you through the rest of it.
So can I add something? I know in the past there were concerns about visibility to the public, and I just wanted to point out that this is right on Avon's website. First page under special announcements, the first thing that comes up, and this presentation is there with that link that you mentioned. And so that public visibility started quite a while ago.
Correct.
That comment.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, and I apologize for this. I just wanted to point out a few things. I'm not going to read the slides to you. You all have them. But a couple of things to point out that the DOE central office is where we house not only the employees that work in administration, but also our employees that work in technology. payroll, accounts payable, purchasing. So it's not just the housing or what people, I know some of the narrative may have been central office administrators. It's actually our folks who run day-to-day business that are most often in the building, and in fact are housed there permanently. Those of us in district leadership tend to be out on the road a bit, visiting schools and meetings and coming here and working with the town. So that's the main place where they work. This building was the portion, I know Houston talked about it at our budget meeting, it was from the Lincoln administration. And it was built in 1879, the original structure, and it's been morphed from that point forward into a school building, into district administration offices, into its current state name. We've been working, I know since I started in 2020, and as I researched this project, the town has been in collaboration working with district leadership, trying to find a solution to the conditions in central office since, I think, 2009, I think was when the documentation Brandon had found. So this is not a new project. This is not something new that we've tried to tackle. It's been something that's been ongoing since that point. And there's a couple of important pieces to it. This structure, we're only able to inhabit the first floor with the flooding issues and the other safety concerns for the basement. It's now become untenable to have anyone work down there except for Mr. Ultimus, who is volunteered to be the lone man. We sectioned off a little space for him with some doors to make it livable. But we do keep some really important just actually evacuate the building over the last 3 years. Dr. Colonel Mullen talked about them in the presentation, so I know Kathleen was there, but we had an instance of water coming in over our electrical box. The only way to turn off power in central office is to have the power company turn it off. We can't actually shut it off in the building. We had noxious odors coming from the bathroom that forced us to evacuate the building till we could have indoor air quality testing done, and then shut down one of the bathrooms for, I think it was a week. So we had to turn 2 gang bathrooms into 1 unisex bathroom with a lock for 30 employees. We also had a contractor come in to do some routine maintenance on our 70-plus-year-old heating system and inadvertently drilled a hole through asbestos tile, which then forced us to again evacuate the building. So all those things, we've tried to make the best of what we had. We've tried to make some cosmetic changes to allow the people to share workspaces that are meant for probably maybe 1 person into 2 people spaces, and lots of different things over the years, even since I've been there, to try to make the situation tenable, to have a face of when parents walk in the door to register the child, it's the first thing they're seeing. The conditions we're living in currently. On the background slide, we talk also about all the costs. These costs are were put together by the architect that the town commissioned to look at our systems and to make it up to code. These are the costs, and Brandon will go through that with you in terms of what all those costs mean. So I won't spend any time on that, but if you look at the existing conditions report, this really highlights for you what we're talking about. The water damage, leaking windows, the exposed ceiling, crawl spaces, and didn't point out as well as the entire building is ADA compliant. So we have employees that have injuries, or we have families that need to come in that do need wheelchair accessibility. We need to do that somewhere else. We need to meet those families somewhere else. Employees, even myself that was on a scooter, due to a foot operation, I couldn't get into the bathroom. So that tends to be a problem. So all the costs associated with doing that are in those background slides. And then again, you have on the last slide of existing conditions, you can see the electrical panel that looks like it's from the 1930s. It's one of the reasons we can't expand our network capabilities. We can't expand any of those things that would be able to allow us to bring this building up to code without fully replacing that system.
Are those fuses?
I was gonna say, are those
Yes.
round fuses?
Yes, I'm sure Miles can explain it a little bit better than I can in terms of what that means.
I haven't seen those in a decade, and they were old and needed to be replaced then. That's crazy.
Taking the time to listen to what it means and why we're working with the town and have been collaborating with them for this over 8, 9, 10 years there to make the situation change a little bit. And so we have some options of what we can do to make that happen.
It's like the building's greatest hits.
That's a blast from the
I
past
wish we
for
had a
me.
video where the water was rushing in over the electrical box.
Yes.
Is it fair to say that this is our worst physical plant property in the town?
Town owned,
I
sure.
mean, I can't speak to all the Board of Ed facilities, but certainly as far as a town facility is concerned, absolutely. I mean, in comparison to a town facility.
We have other bed facilities that are worse than this?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Roaring Brook is old and middle school are old and we're getting up there in age, but in no comparison.
In this century though.
They are, and
Well, not just century.
Nope.
20th century.
we have students going there on a daily basis, so that has been where our resources have gone to keep those buildings in much better condition.
And as Susan mentioned, this work has been going on for quite a while now. As I said at the council meeting, it's funny how time flies. I think I'm the most senior staff person at this point that's been involved in this, but certainly when Gary Mahler was here, Peter Gasky, who was before Miles, Heather Rashad before Susan, it's always been an issue. So what I want to do is walk you through the different options that we considered before making the recommendation to purchase the building located at 200 Fisher Drive. And just a caveat, as I mentioned at the council meetings, there are a lot of documents that are related to this effort. And they're all public documents. Anybody who wants to take them up, just send me an email. We have not only the appraisal that's been completed, we've got existing condition reports for the existing Board of Ed Central Administration Office, as well as the proposed acquisition, 200 Fisher Drive. We've got an environmental assessment that's completed. So anybody who wants to look at those documents, they're available. So in terms of available options from the very start, we looked at essentially 4. Renovating the existing building, renovating and expanding the existing building. Because even with the renovation, the building was still insufficient to meet the programmatic needs of Board of Education. We looked at building a new facility on the existing site. We looked at leasing a facility, and finally, we looked at the option of purchasing an existing facility. So for each of these, I'll just kind of walk you through the steps. The first option, which is renovating the existing building, Susan talked with you a little bit about the existing conditions. Do repeated flooding events. We would need to correct outstanding ADA accessibility issues. And we have the list of capital requirements, capital improvement requirements that we would have to complete, which are included earlier in the presentation. These have all been identified by the architect that we tasked with assessing the building And the projects include replacing the 70-year-old steam heating system at a cost of about $969,000, removing the very antiquated electrical system, which would be over $1 million, remediation of the asbestos throughout the building at $522,000, replacing the ceilings and installing adequate insulation for about $400,000, replacing the damaged flooring at $173,000, various ADA compliance requirements, $218,000, rotted exterior and interior structure replacement at $407,000, updating the communications and security systems at $387,000, replacing broken aged single panel windows throughout the building at $50,000, repairing the basement that's been damaged due to the flooding issues. And there are other projects identified in the report that add up to about $370,000. So that would be the scope of renovating the existing building. And if you go, if you go to the next slide, you can see what would be involved in renovating and expanding the existing building. Expanding, we'd be looking at adding another 7,300 square feet, and it would include all of the work identified in the renovation project, but it would be adding the additional space for offices and meeting space and to make a more efficient space configuration. So when you put options 1A and 1B next to each other, you can see the cost estimates involved with this. The renovation alone is estimated at about $4.6 million. You've got site improvements at $250, furniture, fixtures, and equipment at $150, architectural and engineering fees at $504, and then both options would require a temporary facility that we assumed would cost about $190,000. So the renovation option alone is an estimate of about $5.7 million. And then the second column there is renovate and expand. And it's basically everything in column 1, but more. So you've got the expansion cost, which is about $3.8 million, additional cost related to site improvements, additional cost related to furniture, fixtures, and equipment, more architectural and engineering fees, but the temporary facility cost would stay the same. So 5.7 for the renovation and 10.1 for the renovation and expansion. One thing to keep in mind as we go through this, when we did the long-range planning for capital projects, which I think was presented to the Board of Finance back in March of 2023, we assumed a cost of about $5 million for some project to fix the situation with the central administration building. So option 2, build new on the existing site. We assumed a scope of work of constructing a new 18,000 to 20,000 square foot building at the current address. And the cost estimate for that project would be approximately $11.5 million to about $13 million. And that would include all of the construction, site work, all of those cost categories that we looked at in the prior option.
May I interject for a moment?
Yeah.
What are the space needs right now? Is it 18 to 200, or I'm sorry, 18 to 20,000? Is that the space needs right now, or is that the space needs with an anticipated growth factor?
That would be the space needs with anticipated growth. The space needs now are the 13 to 15, I believe, in Cheryl's report on our existing conditions. We have 13. Half of that's unusable except for storage that's may be ruined.
So you don't have 13?
No.
Well,
If it's there,
physical building is 13, but they're
but
not
not
using
using
it.
We have
because
about
they can't.
71 of crammed space that we're able to use right now.
okay, so 18 to 20 is the need. Thank you.
Okay, so that's option 2. Option 3 is the lease option. So again, with all these things, we have to make a couple of assumptions, but you assume office space is currently leasing at about $19 a square foot. A 13,000 square foot building would lease for approximately $247,000 annually, plus expenses, common area maintenance, and pass-through costs. And if you just look at that over, say, 15 years, which is the likely length of any debt that we're going to issue, you come out to a cost of approximately $3.7 million for leasing office space, which, at the end, you have nothing to show for it. You paid rent for 15 years. Fourth option was the one that ultimately we're recommending, which is purchasing an existing building and renovating. And I should say that before we settled on 200 Fisher, we did physically look at a couple of other options, specifically 2 buildings located on Fisher Drive. Neither of those worked out for different reasons, but I think of the 3 that we looked at, Fisher is the best fit for what we need. So just some basics about the building. It's 20,908 square feet, built in 1986. At least at first, the Board of Ed would occupy about 13,341 square feet. The building is partially occupied. There are other tenants in the building. This space would meet the Board of Ed's needs and potentially allow for consolidations of administrative functions away from existing school facilities. Just a couple of pictures to give you an orientation. You've got the exterior. This is, if you drive into the parking lot, this is what it looks like when you walk in from the backside. If you go to the next slide, that is just a kind of a good shot of what the office space looks like. That's on the first floor of the south wing. And then this slide here gives you an overview of location. So you can see up at the top there, that's the location of 200 Fisher. You've got Simsbury Road off to the right, and then just as a point of reference, you've got Town Hall down there at the bottom. All right, so in terms of cost estimate, and again, we have the existing conditions report that was prepared by the architect to back all of this up. And then we have the cost estimate, which was prepared with the architect and is really designed to get the office space into moving condition for the Board of Ed. This is basically, kind of the baseline to get them into the building. There may be future capital projects that would be necessary, in the out years. But the goal here is to get them in and get them using the space on day one. So just to walk through these line items, you've got the purchase price of $2,250,000. The financing costs are $63,800. The site improvements, these are basically all of the improvements that are necessary, as I mentioned, to get the building into moving condition for the Board of Ed. One of the key areas of cost has to do with office configuration. And the primary office space that they're going to be located in basically has partitions right now. It has half walls in the office, just like you saw in that prior slide. And for their operational requirements, they need walls because they need confidentiality. They need to be able to have private meetings. So Board of Ed staff in the town worked with the architect, to identify a floor plan for where those offices and walls need to go. And this is the cost for that plan, $653,000. And then information technology, that would require all of the IT necessary for the Board of Ed to function. That's about $220,000. So the bottom line is to acquire the building and pay for financing costs and all of the other improvements, we're looking at an appropriation of $3,187,000. That's the amount that will be submitted to the special town meeting for approval. Keep in mind, the special town meeting, that's where there's a moderator that runs it, and it's a hand vote as opposed to a machine vote. So I sort of preempted some of this, but this goes into a little more detail about the scope of work for the renovation. Again, it's office space configuration, renovating the west wing of the second floor, which is where the primary administrative functions of the ed would be located. Demolition, drywalling, partitions, construction of new interior full height partitions, modification of existing HVAC system, addition of ADA compliant single-use restroom, new paint and carpet tiles throughout the renovated area. There's also some work that we would be doing in the south wing, similar work, and that's the area where the IT department would relocate. So that's option 4. Those are the costs involved. That's the scope of work for the renovation. To take you through, kind of the big picture financing piece with this, I thought it would be helpful for you to see what the debt service looks like going forward. And what this graph is designed to show you is basically the approved debt that's outstanding. That's the blue bar. The red portion of the bar is the anticipated debt issuance. Those are basically the projects that are approved, but we haven't issued the debt yet. That would be the radio system and the fire apparatus purchase. And then you can see this green portion of the bar here is what the new debt would look like if you layer in the purchase of 200 Fisher Drive on top of it. So just as a reminder, we're currently in fiscal year 25. When you look to fiscal year 26 and 27, you can see that we would have a spike for those 2 years, about $1 million a year. This is where it's important to keep in mind that as a percentage of the tax levy, we generally keep debt service and capital flat as a percentage. And what we do is, depending on whether or not more debt is coming online or more debt is falling off, we kind of rotate, we go between the two of them, so that as a percentage of the levy, what we're funding for capital and debt is always stable. So in this instance, the way that we would handle the $1 million increase is, without it having an outsized impact on the levy, is we would basically reduce capital spending for those 2 years. There's also an outstanding assignment for debt service that we could call in. And there are a couple of other options that we could look at to try to just make sure that we can level off that increase in debt service without it having an outsized impact on either the tax levy or expenditures for the 2 years that it spikes. By the time, of course, we get to 2028, you can see that it really drops off nicely. All right, so those are the options. That is kind of the impact on the debt service. I thought it would be helpful just to talk you through our concept of how the operations would run. So this is a little bit unusual. It's a good unusual, but we would be purchasing a building with tenants. And the nice part about that is have some revenue coming in to offset the cost of the operation of the building. And generally, the way that we like to set those sorts of arrangements up from a financial perspective is to establish a special revenue fund. You'll probably recall that we have any number of special revenue funds. We have the sewer fund, we have the Fisher Meadows special revenue fund, the cafeteria fund. What they all have in common is they have a specific revenue source, whether it's a user fee or a lease payment, and they have a specific expenditure function. So Fisher Meadows, for instance, we take in revenue from a land lease, and the revenue that comes in from the land lease can only be used for the benefit of the property to make improvements, as an example. So we would do something similar in this case. We would establish a special revenue fund, and the revenue coming in would basically be two sources. It would be the rents that are coming in from the lessees of the building, and it would be some amount of funding from the Board of Education to offset the cost. As you know now, when you look at the Board of Ed's operating budget, they pay, I'll go into some detail on this, but they pay X amount of dollars per year to maintain their current facility. Yeah, so these are the revenue cost projections. So as you, incidentally, the numbers for these you can all find in the appraisal report. So if you look at the revenue projections, we would be assuming, based on the rent roll, lease payments of about $129,000 a year. We did add some allowance for non-collection. That would put our net lease revenue at about $119,000. And just as a plug number, to balance it off with expenditures, we put the Board of Ed in for $34,509. Important to note under note 2 on the right, the current fiscal year 24 operating costs for the central administration building were about $107,000. So
the 34,509 is a plug, though.
yes, that's right. So we've got the utilities. That's going to be your water, your electricity, et cetera. That's $57,000. Management and administration of the building. We would continue with the existing property manager, as they're actually the current owner of the building. They know it inside and out, and they would be tasked with handling the maintenance and managing the tenant leases. We've got repairs and maintenance. That's going to be your garbage collection. What else? Garbage collection, custodial. Property insurance, we think this is a pretty conservative number. We haven't gone through underwriting yet, but plus or minus, we think it'll be about $12,000. And then we included about a $12,000 replacement reserve. And again, keeping with the idea that this would function as a special revenue fund, we want to have some level of reserve in the event that minor repairs and upkeep is required. So again, making sort of educated guesses about revenues and expenditures. We think it's going to be about $153,000 a year. This incidentally does not cover debt service. debt service we would budget for separately. So interesting is we've been going through this over the last 2 months, even before we've had many questions about the new building. People want to know about the building. What's going to happen? I don't know. So at the very minimum, we would expect that the old building would have to function in some fashion for some time. So I would expect that if this is approved, we would close sometime late December, early January. That's a difficult time to really start moving this kind of a function in earnest. So I think some level of preparation would begin, in terms of the contracting process and getting the space ready. I don't expect there would be significant movement until school gets out in June. So we would have to continue to carry the existing building for some time. Even when the Board of Ed is entirely cut over to the new building, it's going to be a little bit of time before we can figure out what to do with it. There are a number of options, but I think we all have to remember the building's in terrible condition. So whether it's a demolition and perhaps it's a green space or a pocket park, there has been some discussion, over a decade about the possibility of doing a demolition and then putting it on the market. I don't think that's a very good option, but it should be considered and it's been discussed in the past. At any rate, there's going to be a lot of discussion about it. In the meantime, we estimate the carrying cost would be approximately $35,000 a year in utilities, plus about another $17,000 plus or minus for snow removal. That's basically to keep the light on and to keep the lights on and to keep the pipes from freezing. So, this is kind of the summary page. Again, having walked you through the different options that we've looked at, the total costs associated with each option, the operating costs associated with each. I think this is a really good way of solving the problem. And in terms of next steps in the process, we presented this once to the council. This is the first time we formally presented this with all of the details to the Board of Finance. We have October to do the same again with the council and Board of Finance if there are any questions. This has been through P&Z and it's received a positive referral. We would be looking, I think, in November to formally schedule the special town meeting, which would be done on December 11th. So December 10th, I'm sorry. So still some time for this to breathe, still some time to answer questions, but it's definitely on a track for that special town meeting.
So just add some commentary. I agree with option 4 being obviously the preferred, and I understand that now is the opportunity. So taking that opportunity is a good idea, despite the level of debt service that we might have to bear for the next couple of years. But I look at that as a $3.2 million debt of liability instead of a $5.7 million liability in our building that doesn't even meet our needs. We have a $5.7 million liability in that building that we are in now. But we can solve that problem by purchasing another building. And I think it's a great option.
And in light of the value of commercial real estate, as shown by our revaluation, it happily coincided with the fact that it's harder to sell commercial real estate at this point.
Mm-hmm.
How much tax revenue comes off the rolls?
It's about 45,000.
And the tenants, are they located on the first floor?
Yeah, they are. There are 2 tenants on the first floor, 1 tenant on the second.
Is there space, a lot of the presentation talks a lot about the second floor and putting stuff up on the second floor. Have we thought of, or have we given any thought of putting anything on the first floor that would be easily accessible to parents to?
The new building?
Yeah.
You're talking about, so the way the tenants are, we would be taking over all of the
There's
suite.
2 wings.
Yeah, there's 2, so there's 2
Oh,
full wings. We'll be taking over both wings on the top floor eventually, with the 1 tenant lease ending into our stay, but the rest of that.
New station alert has arrived.
Configuration, we would be
Oh, thank
taking
you.
over. And then the IT team would be would be moving into the first floor, one of the wings. So it's just, at least the lease terms that we currently have would be leasing that 1 wing for a longer period of time.
First floor.
First floor
Okay.
wing, and that would meet our needs. In terms of the parents coming in, we thought, just the way the configuration landed, we tried to move departments into spaces that we need the least amount of renovations, right? So our goal was to have the least amount of impact in terms of cost as well. And the first floor wing that IT is moving in, very little needs to be done there except a doorway entrance. And a tiny bit of configuration in the middle section to make it open for them for workspace, but the rest of the suite is very well configured for them. So it is a nice space. There's a really nice atrium. So I think they're really nice, welcoming when parents and visitors do come in. And eventually we may put a kind of visiting area or a meeting room on the first floor of the rest of the IT space if it allows in future years.
I appreciate the thought of utilizing the space as best as you can and reducing renovation costs. I would recommend or ask you to consider anything that's customer facing, if you could put that on the first floor, just to make it easier, sort of an impression that's better than the impression people are getting now walking into Simsbury Road. And do we expect to have those tenants there for, not necessarily the tenants that we have, but do we expect to have a revenue source, whether it's turning over those tenants with other tenants for a period of time before we move into the 20,000 space that has a lot of our buffer, as we need it?
I think it depends. I think it depends what the space needs are of the Board of Education at the time that the leases are up for renewal. If they don't need it, then yeah, absolutely. Having a revenue offset comes in handy.
Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the lease on the top floor expires first and the ones on the first floor expire later.
Yeah, that's right, Houston.
So that's, while there's an elevator in there, but that means that unless you're going to move other tenants around, you've got to pretty much inhabit the second floor first. Further questions?
This really seems like a no-brainer.
I just have a question on, because I thought that this was asked when I went to the town council meeting, but the page that says option number 4 on it, allow for consolidation of administrative functions, relieving space constraints in the school buildings. I thought we asked if people were going to be moving out of the schools into this building. I thought the answer was no, but is that Not right.
We would be moving, I think we talked about food service, our director of food services and the assistant food service manager. They're currently in the high school. If you visited the high school in the cafeteria, there's space that says school store in the far right-hand side of the cafeteria. It's not a school store. It hasn't been in some years for number of reasons, but one of them being space constraints. So Mrs. Dreyer and Mrs. McLaurin would be moving into central office when we're able to take over all of the second floor. When we have that space, until we have that one tenant move, they would stay, but that would free up some space for us immediately when they move at the high school. And so something we've had a need for quite a while is our robotics team, are kind of nomads in the building. You know, it's a hard space to put a robot in, to put, and have a challenge course. So that's ideally, Mr. Oldsmith had been working with me, trying to identify spaces all throughout the schools, trying to put them in. So we would put them in there. Mr. Oldsmith has an additional office at Thompson Brook, that if we ever needed space there, he could consolidate full-time with us. We have some other folks out there, maybe some other files. We would be able to bring on more permanent files. Again, we can't use that basement very well, so we haven't consolidated all the information. Would it be we have 4 more classrooms? No, absolutely not, because the spaces we're using for these sorts of things are, we talked about, our closets, our spaces we've renovated. There are kind of holes in the walls in the building wherever we can find a space. We're at capacity at our elementary schools already. So it's really going to be utilizing some free nooks and crannies to give our schools a little bit of more flex room, rather than large spaces moving over to the central office.
Has the district thought about digitizing any material that can be digitally stored?
We've been talking about that. Mr. Klein and I have been working on talking. It's a large lift in terms of finances to get back stuff. Some of it you have to have in paper. All the state legislation necessarily isn't up to speed with the 21st or 22nd century. So some of it you may have old permanent files from 1950s. We do outsource some of that to a third-party storage space, but again, that's a long-term cost that we're not getting anything out of to do that. And I think the last for the town, $30,000, 30 to 40, just to digitize our backlog right now, and that's not going forward. There's special education files, student files, there are permanent records we have to.
All right, any more questions? All right, hearing none. We've got the supplemental appropriation DEEP grant for Sperry Park softball field, $200,000. Who's going to take the lead on that?
Yeah, I can go through that. So, right, in your background material, I included a staff report, a letter from the Little League, and I think a drawing. Do you have a drawing in your packets? You might.
Yes, to the drawing.
Good. So the background with this, for some time now, we've been working with the Little League on developing a new field, a softball field at Sperry Park. And about a year and a half or so ago, I'm going to say, something in that range, our state representative was successful in securing a grant for $200,000 for the project. And the town has continued to work with the Little League to develop a project plan and cost estimate. So at this point, we have the plan and we have the cost estimate. If you've been on Simsbury Road and looked up by the annex, you've probably seen a lot of dirt moving around. We've been bringing dirt in from the Old Farms Road project, and we've been basically spreading it to create a level surface. And we've also been bringing in millings to create millings that we then roll to create a new parking area in preparation for a field. So what we're looking for here is an appropriation of grant funding of $200,000. what that's going to allow us to do is, number one, get the state off our back about spending it. They'd like to see it get in the works. And number two, if we can continue the work that we have underway now, we're going to be ahead of the game in terms of the growing time for the field, because we will pick up basically 2 growing seasons before July 1st. We'll pick up the balance of the fall and we'll pick up the spring. In terms of the project cost, you saw in your background material, the Little League has committed $150,000 to the project at least. And the town council's intention is to fund the cost difference through the fiscal year 26 capital budget. I should add, one of the elements that's really driving the importance of the project is Title IX compliance. When you look at the disparity between the Little League fields and the softball fields, they're just not equal. So there is some concern, and that's part of what's driving the project. So.
All right, if I could have a motion to approve?
So
Can I ask a question?
Sure,
Can I
I
ask a question, Houston?
was going to ask for a motion and a second and then take questions.
Harry moved,
Okay,
I
great,
seconded.
thank you.
All right, go ahead. Ask your question.
Okay, thank you. So is the Avon Little League similar to Avon Soccer in that it's not operated by the town, but it might be classified as like a nonprofit, a 501c3 or some other nonprofit designation?
I assume they have a nonprofit designation. I can't say for sure, but it's certainly not part of the town.
Okay. Do we rent the fields to Avon Little League? Do they pay us?
I think there is some nominal fee.
Okay. I guess very gracious of the Avon Little League to offer $150,000 towards this project, but do we know how that was determined, and could they pay more?
As I understand it, this is the limit of what they can fund for the project.
I guess being a somewhat skeptic in me, whatever financial benefit is accruing to Avon Little League, I think that ought to really accrue to the town taxpayers, not the members, and the operators of the 501c3. So therefore, I would be fine with voting yes on the motion, provided that we get to audit the books of the Avon Little League.
Might I suggest that instead of using the word audit, we would say review, because audit has a technical meaning that would mean you would have to bring in accountants to look at them. I assume you just mean review.
That'd be fine. Yep. But I want to be able to review the books. Thank you, Houston.
All right. Now, is that going to be a formal request to amend?
It is.
In which case, I would ask the movement, is that considered a friendly amendment or not?
That question's for you, Harry. It was your motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. So what do you mean by friendly? Do you want to amend the motion? Amend the motion.
He
Right.
wants to amend.
He was asking, he wanted to, in effect, amend the motion. Now, if it's friendly, then we don't need to vote on it. If it's not friendly, then we need to vote on the amendment separately. So I asked the movement first if it's friendly. If the movement says yes, then it's friendly. Then I ask the seconder, who then comes back and says yes. And if they're both yes, it's friendly. If either one is no, then it has to go through as an amendment and we vote separately on it.
what's the ramification if it's friendly and it doesn't happen? In other
the sense
words,
that they
if
don't
it's
show us the books if we ask for them.
correct.
I think they probably get a talking to.
I don't know what
I mean,
kind of
I
an,
can't imagine someone saying, "Oh, give us back the money," but I'm sure that it's going to be goodwill in the sense that if we say, "Geez, can we take a quick look at your books?" and if they say, "We don't have any books, but here's our checking account," I'm not overly fussed by that.
I'm fine with a friendly amendment because I would like to see the funds that Representative Calvados DeGraw was able to get for us from the state can be executed on.
Yep. Okay. And then, Micah, were you the second?
I was.
What do you think? Friendly or not?
I I I don't know. I want to say I don't think it is. I think we should vote on it separately because the nature of my second was that the Avon Little League is an honest organization and would give what they can to this, and I inherently trust them, having not had any reason not to. So,
Got it. All right, then we'll just vote on it. So,
I still have questions here before we vote. Right?
yeah, so then it comes into a vote.
Okay.
So then, Brian, you were the first person to do it. Do we have a second in favor of the motion to amend?
Second.
All right. So, all in favor of the motion to amend? I think we'll have to do it by roll call because
I think Carl had some questions about this before a vote on the amendment, yeah?
Yeah.
Carl,
So
you want to speak? Go ahead.
The deep grant, is that is that from the state or is that from us?
Yeah, it's from the
Okay,
state.
so that doesn't affect our taxpayers at all?
Correct.
Okay, so okay, it affects them,
It affects them
At
as
the state
taxpayers to
level.
the state of Connecticut, not to the town.
right, okay. So looking at the Avon Little League, I don't see the purpose of that. This is just a state fund money that is now
Well,
owed to Sperry Park.
the project has a cost of $800,000, is that correct?
Yes.
I think it's 880, almost 900.
There's a considerable gap in what this is gonna cost and what the funding is that we have from either the state or the Little League.
All right, so are we?
All right. So at this point, if I could
Our
have
motion-
all right, any more comments?
Yeah, our motion today, though, is to appropriate the deep grant.
Correct. And then,
And
Brian said he wanted, subject to the proviso of looking at their books and records.
to see if they could give us more money toward the project.
Not a stated purpose.
Yeah,
Not
okay.
necessarily more.
But is the Avon Little League a 501c3 that has open books to us anywhere?
It doesn't say it on their website.
Right, I don't know.
If I could make a recommendation,
Please.
it would be very helpful just to have the grant appropriated.
Yeah.
If this board wants to look at the financials of the Little League, I'm sure I can have a conversation with their president. Something can be arranged. But if the funding isn't appropriated, then we're going to lose the growing season.
And then that's why I would encourage a no vote on the amendment that would only delay the appropriation, which, to the satisfaction of I don't know how many members, I guess we'll find out at the vote here, but to appropriate this grant, I don't need to see the books of the Avon Little League. Maybe later on, before we appropriate more of the town's money on this program, maybe that would be appropriate. But I don't want to put a condition on appropriating the DEEP grant for this softball field. I don't want to put a condition on appropriating this money.
I'm good with that, Micah. So I'm fine with, taking the DEEP grants, but I'm not good with taking Avon taxpayer monies unless we get to review the books of the Avon Little League.
Okay, so that would be a condition on a future moment. And Brandon, you can work with Avon Little League to.
Yes.
Okay, so
Brian, is your motion withdrawn?
Sure, that's fine. Yep.
All right. So then we're back to the original motion, a supplemental appropriation of a DEP grant for Sperry Park for $200,000. So I think we can do this by voice vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Sounds like it carries unanimously. Okay, so the last item, which is the approve the Board of Finance 2025 meeting schedule. I think that is probably relatively straightforward. Can I have a motion to do that?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any comments on the agenda, on the schedule? Looked fine to me. All right, we'll do it on voice vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Any abstentions? Carries unanimously. All right. So, last item is the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
There you go. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carries unanimously in the opinion of the chair. Good evening to everybody.
Good evening. Thank you. 8:27.
That's a long